Well, top of the afternoon, everybody. Bill Joubert here with the Louisiana Small Business Development Center, located at Southeastern University. The LSBDC is a partnership program with SBA and the Louisiana Economic Development. We've got some other sponsors today. We've got St. Tammany Corporation, Hammond Chamber of Commerce, Louisiana Economic Development, and of course, Southeastern. All this information is accurate with the new legislation that's come out. That we're still waiting on a couple of forms and some other things. Bryon Garrety and our staff here at Small Business Development Center, we receive regular training and updates from SBA, so we hope to have the best information out there. If you have a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom. Type your question in. I'd probably type them in earlier rather than later. Hang around for the end because you'll learn a lot from the questions. I've asked Bryon Garrety of Garrety Associates to guide us through this forgiveness part of the program. I've known Bryon all my career. He's a smart guy, former IRS agent, and a real head for strategy. So Bryon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome to everybody. Today, we're going to talk about your PPP loan and how you make it not a loan. You actually get it forgiven, so it doesn't have to be paid back. The SBA and the Treasury Department have gone through a series of changes here. In May, they issued a set of forms, that would allow you to fill out to be filled out and apply for the forgiveness. And it's June now, so they've changed all the forms. In the meantime, Congress passed a new law called the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act, and that's what caused all this. Overall, the law makes things better for us business owners. There's probably a couple things in it you'll go, why did they do that? But all in all, it's still a great program. You get a lot of payroll paid for, a lot of expenses covered, and we do things properly. It does become that grant. It does become that loan. So I call it the Paycheck Protection Loan Forgiveness Application. That's what we're going to talk about today. The forms that we're going to talk about specifically as we get to them are the SBA 3805 with a June revision date on it, not the one with the May revision date on it, and the brand new form, the 3805 EZ. Okay, so Congress and the SBA did something very good here that made sense. They realized not everybody has 15 employees and is going to have a complicated calculation for their loan forgiveness. Some have 1 or 2 employees, so they created a much easier form to use. Everything we're talking about today really stems from the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, passed at the end of March. In that program, we've got pandemic unemployment coverage, the individual stimulus checks, a paycheck protection program, which we're talking about today, and various tax law changes. The reason I bring this up is that if you're spending your PPP dollars right now, you're in your covered period, you can't be on unemployment in the same covered period. It's got to be one or the other. They don't allow double dipping. Okay. It is a Small Business Administration loan program. It's a 7A program. It's a sister program to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Those loans, those EIDL loans, they are back up and running now. You can apply online. It does look like there's currently a cap of $150,000 on them, but you can use both PPP and EIDL together in your business if you do it correctly. Through last Friday, we don't have the numbers for today yet. In the state of Louisiana, there were 69,202 PPP loans totaling $7.241 billion. There's still over $100 billion in the PPP program, and applications have gone to just a small drip. Where banks were doing thousands of them, they're now doing 1 or 2 a week, and a lot of banks have just said there's not enough to keep doing them. So finding a lender right now, at least for the next 10 days or so, is pretty difficult. The program does end as far as applications next or on June 30th. Okay, important slide here. We'll use this, and you may have to refer back to it when you're filling out your application. There are caps on the amount of total compensation a person can earn while they're under the PPP program, okay? It's all based upon an annual cap of $100,000. If you remember back to your application, if you made over $100,000, you had to take the amount over $100,000 and exclude it and calculate your loan amount based upon the $100,000 cap. Same kind of deal here. I've broken it down for different payrolls to kind of give you an idea, and we're going to show where this helps and hurts us a little bit. One of the things to really bring up with the change of the law, the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act, and the new forms, is that prior to the change of the law, if you were an owner of a company or you were self-employed, you were treated just like an employee. They changed that. Just one of the things that came along with the law. So if you look at the 24-week total, an employee's maximum compensation would be 24 weeks or $46,154, okay? But if you're self-employed or the owner of a company, the maximum compensation you can pull out over 20 weeks is $20,833, okay? So that is a little difference, okay? Basically just reiterating the same things. Hey, for 24 weeks, it's either 46,154 if you're a non-owner, and for 24 weeks, 20,833. Everybody else can just kind of follow their regular payroll amounts. Okay. Why do we mention this, and why do we mention some of the things that we're going to see on the next slide? Well, if the SBA were to determine in the course of its review of your loan, okay, that you were ineligible for PPP, you violated the provisions of the CARE Act, some other ordinance, rule, or guidance from the SBA, you lacked adequate basis for the loan application, then the loan's not eligible to be forgiven. Basically, if it was bad at the beginning, it's going to be bad at the end. So, and if there are little deficiencies in the loan, we certainly want to work with you and have those fixed. The biggest issue that we've seen on loans is the treatment of independent contractors. The site here just goes to the Code of Federal Regulations as it pertains to the PPP loans. It says simply, independent contractors for the purposes of PPP loans are not included in the employee calculation, which means you don't add in your 1099s with your W-2s. If you did, we've got to fix that, okay? Because in the end, if you pay 1099 people with your PPP loan proceeds, it's not forgivable. You're not achieving what you wanted to achieve. Independent contractors, people who receive 1099s, apply by themselves for the PPP program. There's a little separate set of rules that the individual self-employed person follows. So they don't miss out, they just don't apply through the company. Okay. You know, the loan, if it was contained material error or misrepresentation, cannot be forgiven. And that's why we spend a little bit of time making sure that it's correct there. You know, it doesn't have 1099s in it if it shouldn't. It was calculated using the proper calculations, and then we worry about the purposes that it'll be used for. One of the things that we think you should document, and if you've been in the prior seminars, you would have heard this, is what your state of mind and rationale, your reasons behind why you believe you were certified to get these funds. On the original application, you signed a certification that said, based upon current economic circumstances and uncertainties, it is necessary for my business, okay? It's not extra, it's necessary. So what I want each of y'all to do is to take a serious amount of time, 45 minutes, hour and a half, write down your reasons why you got the loan. What was going down, what trends you saw. I'd also want you to meet with, or encourage you to meet with, your CPA and your banker and get these documented. It can be through emails. It doesn't have to be face-to-face, but I think you should take your CPA to lunch. I'm a little biased there. And let's look at the ratios. Let's look at the financial statements. Let's circle the numbers and have them in the file, okay? So if you're a restaurant, it's very easy. The government ordered my doors closed. My revenue went from what I was making to zero, okay? It's going to be very evident on a financial statement. That one's not going to get questioned. But if you had another business that did okay through it, well, did I need the PPP funds? I did have a phone call after yesterday's seminar from a business owner, and they had done pretty well. They said, my P&Ls are looking good, but I asked a very key question. What is your inventory like right now? And they said, oh, it's heavily depleted. And I go, what's going to be the cost of restocking that inventory? The cost is going to be a lot higher than it was during the storm. There are certain things that are just out of stock, out of stock, out of stock. You can see it when you go to certain grocery stores, even Walmart's. I've seen aisles blocked off just because there are no cleaners, there are no paper towels, and there are no toilet papers. So depending upon the severity and the amount of that inventory increase in cost, it may be very easy for them to document that they had a need for the loan. Okay, so when we're talking about the loans, what are our options? Okay, when we're going for forgiveness, it's no forgiveness. The SBA just says nope. Partial forgiveness, a large portion of it's forgiven, but not all of it, or it's entirely forgiven. I know everybody's aiming for entirely forgiven, but there are some businesses out there that had 25 people on payroll last year for their original application period when they measured out against 2019. And now they don't have 25 people, they only have 15. Because the money was based upon 25 people, they weren't paying 25 people anymore. The entire loan probably won't be forgiven. Some of the money will need to go back to the government. But the 15 people that worked for them got paid during their covered period with the PPP funds. And I think you got to focus on what you got, not what you give up. Okay. So in order to have the loan forgiven, 4 major tests, okay? 60% of the money must be spent on payroll. The other 40% is available for other qualifying expenses. Now that's changed. The new law changed that. It was 75% and 25%. Now it's 60-40. It makes it a lot easier for a small business to hit the numbers, which means even more loans will be forgiven. So Congress kind of had a change of heart when originally they were looking at the PPP program. If you look at their testimonies and their debates, nobody was thinking 100% of the loan would be forgiven. They were thinking high percentages, 75, 80, maybe 90, but not 100%. Now Congress is thinking most people will qualify for 100% forgiveness, okay? A few won't, but most will, okay? The other test, we have to look at an employee by employee basis and look and make sure their salary, their compensation, their pay was not reduced. That doesn't mean their hours were reduced or their pay rate was reduced, but did they get the same pay over the same period of time? Okay, this one's tricky. We'll be looking at measurement periods from 2019 and from 2020 and comparing it to your 2020 period when you're spending the PPP funds. And if you've got several employees, you're probably going to need to use Excel, okay, and build some tables. Get your payroll reports from your payroll company, talk to your payroll accountant, and build some of these reference points for information. The third test is a very critical test in the program, and it's for full-time employees or full-time equivalent positions. If you had 10 employees before the pandemic hit, do you have 10 employees while you're paying out the money with PPP? Some companies will, some companies won't. So the 2 tests there are to say, hey, did your payroll costs go down, okay, while you were using the PPP funds? So were you spending less money on payroll? And the other test is, hey, did your number of people you were employing go down? So they kind of test both. And then test 4 is the all-encompassing test, is to make sure the money was spent for only authorized purposes. We didn't get our PPP funds and jump on an airplane to Hawaii to avoid the virus. Okay, test 1, okay, based upon use of funds, 60% rule. It was 75% when you made your application. More than likely, that's what you were running with. That's what everybody told you. This burden has gotten easier to meet. I still say 8 weeks on the slide, but it can be either over 8 weeks or 24 weeks, okay? Everything has to be concluded by December 31st. But the moving from 8 weeks to 24 weeks gives many employers a much greater period of time to spend the money. The counting time or day 1 of the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks is the day you get the money from the bank. So it also allowed certain restaurants who aren't fully open yet that expanded period of time to say, at least let me get to phase 3 where my restaurant can be 50% full and I can have some other tables outside and I can get to where my numbers make sense, where I can cover my cost. Okay. Reduction of salaries for each employee. Again, this is a person by person comparison. Okay, if they don't work for you anymore, you really can't do it. But if you've got the same employees, if I had John Smith working for me before the pandemic, and he was working 40 hours a week at $10 an hour, he was taking home $400. Is that what he's taking home each week as I'm using my PPP funds? It really is that simple. Now, some people can't work 24 hours or can't work 40 hours a week anymore. They've got other responsibilities. There are some safe harbors that are out there that will allow you to go through it, especially if they're caring for somebody that has the coronavirus, OSHA, DHH, anybody like that is given any type of order which restricts them. But you've got to do the test first, because if everybody meets it, you're not worried about any of the safe harbors. You've got to kind of go through the work and then go, all right, I went through the work. Is there any way that improves this for me? And then test 3, the full-time employees, or the FTE equivalents. It's based upon 40 hours, okay? Some other things that the Treasury has done, or the IRS, was based upon 30. This one is a 40-hour week. So 2 people working 20 count as 1. 1 person working 40 counts as 1. 1 person working 45 counts as 1. Okay, so we've either got a lot of part-time workers working for us to add up to it, or we've got some full-time workers working to add up to it. Our reference periods here, an important word, are 2 periods that they've determined. It's February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019. So kind of the time period we were in this time last year, or it's January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020, okay? You're gonna have to build a table. I've got a simplified table to show you and kind of give you a visual, and then we've got the more complex table that the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants has put out, and we will hit that before we finish up today. Okay, so what does it mean if I don't hit the full-time equivalent positions? Okay, well, it can mean quite a few things. If you had originally had 10 people working for you and now you only have 8, 20% of your original funds may not be able to be forgiven. We have a slide that goes through that in just a little bit. I'll go back to this time frame table here and showing maximum amount of compensation, because we've got to use this too. We're going to be using this for a very particular purpose on the FTE calculation, okay? On the FTE calculations, people who are highly compensated that make over $100,000 a year, we get to exclude from the calculation. We also get to exclude the business owners, okay, from the calculation. And we're dealing with the small, as our denominator drops when we do this coverage ratio, it helps improve the chance that your business will get full coverage. I'm going to get back to the table in just a minute and show y'all one of the great safe harbors that are there. Okay, we talked about a company that had 10 full-time workers and then maybe moved to 8. So in this example, they received $100,000 in PPP funds. They had 10 full-time employees based upon looking at what they did in 2019. Now they're in their coverage period. They're 8 weeks, so they're 24 weeks, and they only have 8 people back full-time. Okay, potential problem, because as you can see there at the bottom of the slide, only 8/10 of the loan will qualify for forgiveness. Okay, instead of the full $100,000. So what could they do? Go hire 2 more people? Well, they could, but if the business isn't there, it's kind of a waste. It's kind of silly to do that. What are the other things they can look at? Well, get with your financial advisor or your accountant on this. This is certainly one of those things where we have to look at. But there are a couple safe harbors here, and that's why we were talking about the table. One of the safe harbors, okay, that I'll talk about on the front end is a little bit complicated. It says this: if you made $100,000 during 2019, we don't have to put you into the calculation. That one's easy. But if somebody's equivalent pay period salary was $100,000, they also get excluded. What does that mean? You got a guy that works for you, maybe he makes $1,000 a week, makes $52,000 a year. But if certain things happen, you give him $1,000 bonus. Okay, nice little bonus to take home, or maybe it's at Christmas, or maybe it's a safety bonus. So out of a 1 week period or a 2 week period, his salary, if you annualized it, would be $100,000 or higher. You get to exclude those people too. Okay, so they can't count against you. Okay, The other thing that doesn't count against you is if you offer reemployment to those people that might be out, they may have been laid off, you may have furloughed them and say, hey, come back to work. And they say, no, I'm doing great on unemployment right now. I don't want to come back to work. They kind of refuse. There were some articles in the newspaper and on the news yesterday about that in Louisiana. As long as you can show that you contacted them and offered their employment back, they won't count against you. We have a letter that'll go out in the email after this webinar that you can use for that purposes. And if you use that letter, I would send it certified. I would send it snail mail. I would email it to them. I might even text it to them, because what I would be looking for is to try to get a response where they say, I don't want to come back. That really helps insulate you. So the FTE calculation, because it can have such a dramatic impact, is one of the places where you will pull your hair out trying to get your numbers right. And we'll show you a few tips and tricks to at least get your mind wrapped around it. And then we can talk some more about what some of those safe havens are. You know, whether or not you had somebody that could have earned more than $100,000, did earn more than $100,000, is an owner, or is one of the employees that can be excluded because you offered them their job back, or they're taking care of somebody who had the coronavirus, they have the coronavirus, or there's some other impediment to their returning to work. Okay. On the Treasury's webpage, they have these FAQs, okay? And I have on the bottom of this slide, FAQ number 40. Is exactly what we were talking about. Will a borrower suffer a reduction in forgiveness amount if an employee is laid off, the borrower offers to rehire the employee, same salary, wages, same number of hours, and the employee declines the offer? And right there on the Treasury website, you get your simple no, that won't count against you. Okay, so the employee who rejects the offer of reemployment may forfeit eligibility for continued unemployment compensation. And that's what was in the news yesterday. Louisiana workforce had some articles that came out on it. So, and I believe right now, if you're an employer, you'll be getting notices saying, hey, if you've had anybody that said they're not coming back to work, you have to tell us. Okay, so I hope by now everybody's seen the Sba Form 3805, okay? Let's talk a little bit about it. In its original version, okay, it was an 11-page form with 6 pages of instructions, okay? It was awkward, okay? Now the EZ form, the 3508 EZ, is 3 pages, okay? That's the application. It's got 2 other separate pages of instructions. The full 3805 is a 5-page form that has 6 pages of instructions, but they didn't put it all together. So they're trying to make it look a little more simple. If you've got a complex employee situation, you're going to have to do the long form, okay? And you're going to have to use one of the Excel tables. The one that I'm going to refer you to is at the AICPA website. That's the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, aicpa.org. We've got a slide with this contact information coming up on it, although there are dozens of other ones, okay? I'm going to point you to the AICPA website because I know those things get tested, retested, and there's a lot of guys like me that spend their weekends going through them. Currently, that form has not been adjusted for the 24-week period yet. It's still based upon the 8-week period. That doesn't invalidate it. We can start to populate it with some of the data that we need, and you can always copy and paste out of it into the 24-week form when they probably issue that, I would say probably Monday. But it's still a very useful tool. The long form, again, complicated. The short form, much less complicated. So let's go to the short form, and I'm going to try to pull that up now and see if I can get it on screen for us. Here we go. All right, this is the short form, okay? It's only 3 pages long. There is basic data up here. You could start to fill out even this weekend, data about your business. Some of the things that you may not have, and you got to go back through emails or contact the bank, is like, did your lender give you an initial PPP loan number before the SBA gave you one? So kind of the internal loan number as they were tracking your documents as opposed to the external loan number. I looked at my own, and yes, my lender had. I didn't know what it was, and I had to go back and get it. What was your original PPP loan amount? Okay, and what was its disbursement date? The disbursement date, of course, is important because that is the date that starts to control the 8-week or the 24-week period. It's at your option right now whether you use 8 weeks or 24 weeks. I'm telling most of my clients that we can do that, but let's see where we're at the end of 24 weeks. Let's not file right now. Let's make sure there's nothing out there, or they don't change another rule that will benefit us. Okay. Your EIDL application number, if you have that, this is where you went onto the website, you put in for the EIDL advance, based upon $1,000 per employee. You filled out some basic information about your gross receipts and your cost structure, and provided some personal information. So if you did get that, the amount and then the application number, this is so they can better track you and see what they've paid for. Then you indicate what your payroll is, and then you have to make your election. What is your covered period? Is it going to be that 8-week period or that 24 period? And you put it in there. The alternative period is only for seasonal employees, seasonal employers. Okay. If you had a season where, in the middle of the 24 weeks, things dropped off, it completely stops and then it picks back up. They've got a way to take care of that. So seasonal employers are a little bit more complicated. You have to do some further reading. Most people will use a straight 24-week coverage period. The next part of the form, you may not be able to fill out yet. You don't know what your total payroll costs are if you're still paying out your payroll. Okay. And so there's things like that we can't put in. But this is where we start to accumulate the amount of money that we spent, or account for the amount of money that we've spent, and put it into its correct forms. And then there are some certifications, okay? We had certifications on the original application. There are certifications here that have to be initial, okay? It follows along with the instructions. It does limit any one person to, no more compensation than $100,000 annually. And it has in here exactly the part for the self-employed and for the business owners that limit their compensation, qualifying compensation, to only $20,833, okay? Again, initials on all of this stuff, and then a signature at the bottom, okay? That's how you request this. You send this to the same lender that made your loan, and when it's complete, they will notify you within 60 days of whether or not your loan has been forgiven or not, or if they have questions. The application does go along with a lot of documentation. Okay, so in that documentation, and it's in the instructions, there are things that you're going to have to include. Your payroll reports. You're going to have to show your payroll reports for your reference periods. Okay. And you have the list of people and the amounts paid. If you've got a payroll company, they've gotten used to these requests by now. They should be able to print that, possibly even with a letter. They're going to want to see your first quarter 941. If you finish up, you take the 8 weeks and you're finished up by June 30th, they're certainly going to want to see your second quarter 941. If your 24 weeks goes longer, they may very well want to see your third quarter or fourth quarter, and maybe even your W-2s if you're into next year. So the longer this goes, the more information you may have to provide to show exactly how the money was spent. And that's essentially what you're doing. You're showing them who got it, in what amounts, and why it qualifies. Okay, that's the EZ application. Let me see if I can get the long form application up. Here we go. Okay. The long form application is 5 pages long, okay? The beginning part of it is exactly the same, and the front page looks very, very similar, okay? But when we get beyond the 2 pages that are similar, we get into a Schedule A and a Table 1 and a Table 2. And this is where we have to start doing our math, okay? This is where the amount that we paid people comes in, okay, as opposed to our reference period, and how our full-time equivalent calculations come in. I would say before anybody attempts to fill this out, you sit down in a very calm, quiet place, and you choose your beverage and you drink it, and you underline and you circle and you highlight and you make sure you understand what it's asking, because I promise you, you will get to a place where you go, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. In the end, you know what they're trying to do, but the way they ask the questions can be quite quite obtuse. In the end, you're going to end up using Excel. You know, maybe you have 2 employees, but if you have 2 employees, I think I'd be using the easy form, and you're going to have a list, okay, going down the column. Employee's name, usually first initial, last name, the identifier, last 4 digits of their social security number, how much you paid them during the covered period, okay, what their average FTEs are, and whether or not they had a salary reduction. All the tests that we essentially talked about, okay? As you see that, you'll figure out whether or not you passed or failed. And if you failed, you'll come down and you'll complete the sections on your safe harbors. You know, did you rehire any of these FTEs so that you were back up to your original number by December 31st? Did you increase pay or get people back to their hours so that their compensation was restored by December 31st? So there are different safe harbors that will get you through that, those being the 2 primary ones. All right, so the form is complicated. How do we try to simplify it? Well, let's look again at what they're asking, and let's look at an Excel sheet that can help us calculate the amounts that the government's asking for. I'm going to pull that up now. All right, so what are they essentially asking for? Okay, I've got an example here, a little company, ARG LLC. The first part of my chart here is exactly what I did for PPP, okay? I took last year's W-2s, I put them into a column, I totaled them up, I made sure nobody was over $100,000, okay? They weren't, so the full amount qualified. I divided it by 12, multiplied it by 2.5, and found out that this little company got $56,709 in PPP funds. Okay, so what do I have to do next? Okay, well I have to do some homework. My first table over here is going to be, all right, in reference period number 1, I've got to go list who my employees are. All right, reference period number 1 is going to be February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019. So some of these same names will come up, but their wages will be different. And when I'm looking at their wages, you know, when I'm looking at their names and their wages, I also need to know the hours that they were working, where, you know, were they full-time, were they part-time, were they working 40, were they working 20, how many weeks this period covers, because one of the other reference periods is much shorter, okay? And then I can calculate their average compensation per week, okay? When I look at their average compensation per week, I've got a total. When I come to reference period number 2, I can take the same data, I can put it in and come to average compensation per week. When I get to my covered period, my 8 weeks or my 24 weeks, I can put my people in, do my hours, do my weeks, and get their average compensation per week. If the average compensation per week under the covered period is 25% or more less than their average compensation during one of the reference periods, I have a potential issue, okay? I use the same methodology when I do my FTE calculations. So if I have their hours, okay, I can take the total hours, okay, and use that factor of 40, divide it by 40, and come up with the total number of FTEs I had during reference period number 1, the total number of FTEs I had during reference period number 2, and get my total number of FTEs during coverage period, okay? When I'm looking at my reference periods, I get to use the one that benefits me the most, okay? So if my January 2020 to the end of February 2020 reference period said I had 9 FTEs, and the one from 2019 said I had 10, I'm going to choose 9, okay? The lower denominator helps me, okay? And then I compare it and say, hey, did I have a drop in my total number of FTEs? Really depends on what happens during my coverage period. And even if I did, please remember, there are those safe harbors out there that say, hey, did I restore them, or did I have the same number of FTEs by the end of December? Did I have the same number of, did I restore their salaries by the end of December? So what does this mean? It means if you fill out your form and you're currently not passing, hey, there's a large portion of the loan that won't be forgiven, you probably want to wait I don't think the time is going to hurt you. You may have an increase in business and things may get better. So you may fill it out initially, but say, no, it's not time to turn it in because I'm going to be looking for one of the safe harbors to kick in. Okay. I'm going to pull up another form that is not as simple as that one, and it's the one that the AICPA has put out. Okay, here we go. The AICPA form, we can email it to you, but again, it states on here that it's not updated for the 24-week period yet, so there will be another one coming out, we think, within the next week. There are instructions throughout this form. There's an order where they ask you to key in the data, and the blue fields on it are the ones where you enter data. Some of the other fields cannot be manipulated. Okay, so you're going to key data in the PPT forgiveness tab. You're going to complete the non-payroll cost tracker, and you're going to do the FTE input tab. So you jump back and forth between the tabs on the bottom. But in the end, you're going to come back here to some information on the FTEs, follow the instructions so that you get some base calculations, and you're going to come to this form, the payroll accumulator, okay, where you're going to list the employees, their identifying number, whether they're hourly or salaried, and then in which period, how much you paid them, their hours, and those type of things. And it goes across the page. It is a good table. It will make you think about a lot of things, okay? And it's to be used if your payroll is complicated. You know, some of the other things can be done, you know, on the back of a napkin if you had to, because there's only one person, you know, if the company's simple. Let me, I know we're going to run out of time before we get to, you know, we're going to have a lot of questions. So I do want to show you some of these, some other things. We'll get back to the slides in just a minute. The non-payroll cost tracker is where you put in your other qualifying items, your rent, your utilities, your interest on existing obligations. Okay. And what all this data does is it essentially helps you fill out those worksheets that are on the 3805. Your 3805 is still going to have to be filled out, signed, and sent in, but this gives you your work papers to show the bank how much work you did. It also gives you a great project to work with your accountant very closely on. Okay. So there is a process to this. Let's see where you are at the process. Very few people would be able to start this and finish this probably this week. They don't have the data yet. They haven't collected all of it. Most people will have to take some serious time if they have complicated payroll to get it completed. Believe me, this is not something you're going to do in an hour. It's not something, if you have 15 employees that have worked various schedules, have lost hours, and you've, you know, hired and let people go, that you're going to do in 3 hours. I'm going to tell you it's going to be more like 2 days worth of work, okay, to get it right. And you're going to be pulling in data from your payroll companies, from your CPA, from your accounting team at the office. Everybody's going to have some contribution here. Again, if we've got a large number of employees, it probably gets more complicated. If we start to build towards 40, 50, 60 employees, you could be saying, you could be giving this to one of your payroll accountants, and they may spend the week on it, and that might be a very fair period of time, because it does get complex, especially when you're looking to maximize your loan forgiveness. Getting the data correct and having the supporting data is critical. Right, let me move this out and see if we can get back to our slides. All right. We've taken a look at the Form 3805, its latest revisions. On the next slides, I've just broken down a lot of what's on the 3805, just kind of as a checklist. If you didn't want to work on the form, if you wanted to use this as a tool or a work paper and say, hey, I know the business's legal name, we've got boxes there to check off. I'm an accountant. We love checklists. Okay. If there is anything in here that I haven't converted over for where it says 8 weeks, it's either 8 weeks or 24 weeks at your option. You're going to do what's best for you. Do remember this: if you receive more than $2 million in PPP funds, You're going to have a full audit on your account, and there's other procedures and other forms you have to fill out. People who received less than $2 million are not necessarily free. They're going to get looked at too. There'll be sample populations that look at, and then anything that was an outlier that was kind of odd is probably going to get looked at or questioned also. So a number of people just attending today may have to provide additional documentation and explanation to the lender and to the SBA. Okay, again, just more of the checklist that we've kind of put together for you, and some of the instructions kind of boiled down. Reference-wise, this is another thing I want to make sure that I share with each of you. There is always good information and bad information, real news and fake news, okay? We want you to have the real news, we want you to have the good information, and the simplest way we have found to do that is to take you to the proper source, okay? Treasury.gov is the absolute authority on the PPP program. It's their child, okay? The SBA is part of the Treasury Department, so SBA.gov has excellent resources to tell you about the PPP program and about how to get forgiveness. Aicpa.org has a full page, or pages, I should say, a full section on the PPP program, okay? My website, GarretyCPA.com, I have a PPP page. You can go to it. It links to a lot of these other things. So it's there are some repeats there, but we do have some of the seminars, some of the worksheets and things like that that are there for resources also. And then, of course, Southeastern University's Small Business Development Center, or any of the small business development centers located throughout Louisiana. Those are fantastic resources to ask questions and to get help. And here's the big secret. The small business development centers are funded with grants from the SBA. They talk to the SBA on a daily basis. They know the latest and greatest news, and their services are free. Okay, so if you're in a bind right now and you have no funds to pay your CPA, you still have a way to get some resources and get access to forms or advice, and just somebody to listen through. If you have questions directly for us, you can always email sgarrety@garretycpa.com and we will get back to you. Let me show you some of these resources before we go to questions. Okay, so the first one, I'll go with my profession. This is the AICPA website. And right here, we can go to the Coronavirus Resource Center. It's over here in the gray area on the purple page. And then the Paycheck Protection Plan. And as we scroll down that page, lots of information, lots of instructions. And we get down to this section right here where the little plus signs are off the side, and we have loan forgiveness resources. Okay. Under the loan forgiveness resources, we have links to the applications and instructions, just like they would on the Treasury site. Steps for calculating forgiveness, I've basically showed you those, but you can print it out. It's still based upon the 8 weeks, their reference periods. When they're looking at it, it'll be updated to 24 shortly. Okay. And then the PPP loan forgiveness calculator. This is the actual Excel file that we were looking at just a few minutes ago. It will be updated, so you could always download this one and begin filling out data, knowing that you can copy and paste it into the new resource when it becomes available. Okay, the Treasury's front page, the Treasury's homepage. This is it right now. We've got a picture of the Treasury Secretary there, and there is this big red banner that says COVID-19. Click here to learn about the Paycheck Protection Loans. You click there and come down the page, and boom, we have everything we need and everything that's basically been published on the PPP program. So we have the applications that were issued in April, and we have the revised applications that were issued on June 11th and June 12th. We have the forgiveness applications as they're listed here, okay? And with a revision date of the 16th on them. These are the newest ones. I don't know that these will go through any more revisions. And please let me show you the frequently asked questions. This right here, about half the questions are based upon the banks and the lenders, and about half of them are based upon real people. But, you know, and out of the real people, there's some large company questions and some small company questions. But if you have a questions, it's definitely worth the read through. Last updated on May 27th, but I promise you with these new forms and things like that, this is probably going to get a lot of exercise next week with new questions and new answers being posted. Okay. Those are your resources and a way to navigate them. Okay. One other resource is regulation.gov. If you know a regulation site, you can type it in and print it out. I provided 2 of those earlier in the slide, so you can have those. And remember, this is a government program. All we have to do is keep calm and fill out the next form. Again, if you have questions, yeah, we'd love to handle them for you. Let us know what we can do for you. And with that, if there are any questions from the participants, please look you know, at the bottom of your screen. You have a question and answer button. You can type your questions in there, and we're going to start going through those now.
Thank you, Bryon. The first question is, my bank is stating that they have not received guidelines to make loans forgivable. When will they receive these guidelines, and when should I expect to complete forms?
Okay, your bank is correct. They basically issued guidelines in May, and they pulled them all back and said, hey, just hold off, guys, we're working on it. The Treasury Department is exactly in that phase. Here's the new form. We're going to publish some new questions and answers right now. The banks are sending in their questions. How do we handle this? How do we handle that? And probably starting next week, and then certainly after the 4th of July, probably this murky water is going to get to be clear. So I would be patient at least till the until after July 4th, that little break that the federal government goes on. And but you can start preparing your data. You can, you know, get the information from your payroll company. You can start building your tables and filling it in.
If it has been 8 weeks and my PPP is exhausted, can I now apply for unemployment?
You can. If your PPP has been exhausted, you can apply for pandemic unemployment as originally issued. That would continue for you until the end of July, and then the government is going to meet again and decide if they're going to continue pandemic unemployment.
If you were approved for the PPP loan under the 8-week period, will you automatically be updated to the 24 payment period under the new laws, or do you need to request the extended period?
There is no request. It's at your option. Okay, so if you did all your work and you're done at the end of 8 weeks, you have your tables complete, you can start to send it in to the bank. I've got some companies where they just hit their 8 weeks, and they've got professional accounting staff. They're large enough to do that, so their numbers are good. They're basically ready to submit. But I've said, hey, we want to at least hold off until we have final guidance, and we may want to hold out for 24 weeks just to see if anything else kind of works its way through that is beneficial to you.
If you were otherwise ineligible for a loan but did not apply for forgiveness and pay it back in 24 monthly payments, does that create a problem?
Okay, maybe would be the answer. It really depends on what made you ineligible. Okay, that's one where I would start talking with the lender now. It's always better to be in front of it than to get hit by it. So I've had clients that made mistakes on their applications. They've had to go back to their lenders and recalculate, reduce the amount of their PPPs. I've had one guy who's gone back in and was able to increase the amount of his PPP. But I think working with the lender and having them have full knowledge of your situation is going to be your real saving grace.
I received over $20,000 and took it out during 8 weeks. What does 24 weeks refer to, and should I have stretched it through the 24 weeks instead of 8?
Probably not. When you received your funds, the 8-week period was what was applicable. The 24-week period didn't come into being until June, so till after the first week of June. So probably not. You're fine on the 8 weeks, and if you're done and you can complete your tables, I would wait until the bank has their final guidance and they say you can turn in your application, but you'd be okay to do it then.
You said if I have PPP money that you cannot collect unemployment. You meant as an employer, correct? Not employees that for many reasons can't either come back or at all, or can only on a limited basis.
Well, Yes, as an employer for sure, you know, you can't be working for your company, drawing PPP funds in a paycheck and getting unemployment. It really applies to self-employed people. You know, a self-employed person can apply for PPP funds and they could have been on unemployment or could go on unemployment. They just, if they're on PPP funds that last 8 weeks, they can't be on unemployment for those same 8 weeks they're drawing the PPP funds.
I have 88 employees. My payroll never went down. In fact, it went up. Do I qualify for the easy form? My bank says he thinks so.
I think you do too, yeah, because you're going to be able to make all of your certifications if your payroll went up, and it should be very evident that you can show that your payroll went up.
Originally, it said PPP funds could cover from 2/15 to 6/30. If my business got funded 4/14 and I used the funds to cover March and April, which is 8 weeks payroll, does that work, or does it have to start on the date that it was funded?
Okay. All the rules say that you have to start looking forward on the date the money was received. So you don't get a look back period. It's only look forward.
On the loan application, when it asked how many employees, it did not ask for FTE. So I gave the total number averaged, which is way higher than FTE. Can that be adjusted?
It can, and you don't have to worry about it, because when you go for the forgiveness application, it allows you to make any correction there. Okay, so they did put that number on the original application, and people just said, some people put in the total number of W-2s that they issued last year, which was way higher than their employee base. On the forgiveness application, you get to correct it and say, hey, this is my true number of FTEs, you know, before, and this is my true number of FTEs now.
If I'm a sole proprietor, can I use the full amount for payroll over 24 weeks as long as it doesn't go over the max?
You can, and your maximum limit increased from the 8-week limit to 20,833, which is basically still calculated as your percentage of payroll over the $100,000. But as the sole proprietor, your limit is that 20,833.
Is it a firm 8 weeks or 24 weeks only, meaning nothing in between?
Okay, well, you might go beyond 8 weeks up to 24 weeks, but it should cover at least 8 weeks, because the calculation amounts were at 2.5% times whatever the base figures were, which would be 8 weeks, a little over 8 weeks.
How are self-employed persons that are not on a W-2 determined that
How
what
they're
they are paid? Yeah.
Okay. Very similar to the way that the calculations were done. You have to have a 2019 Schedule C completed, your self-employed business form completed, and it has to run off of line 31. So, and this is what the SBA and the IRS will end up checking. You know, if you had $60,000 worth of profit to go into the program, that would have resulted in a PPP loan of $12,500. That's what they're going to be looking to do. I've seen some other Schedule C and had some meetings with some other people who've kind of gotten sideways on those self-employment calculations. We just want to make sure that you do it correctly. You know, the way that you do it is you take your self-employed profit from 2019. You divide it by 52. That gives you your amount per week, and you multiply it out times your 8 weeks or longer until you reach a maximum of 20,833.
Can I apply for loan forgiveness at any point that my PPP money is gone? Do I have to wait the 24 weeks?
You probably don't have to wait the 24 weeks, but you're going to have to wait until the banks have their final guidance issued.
If my business argument for forgiveness has been weakened by better than expected revenue and earnings during the applicable period, are there any penalties if we simply do not apply for forgiveness and repay the loan on the stated terms? In other words, does the audit exposure arise out of the application for receipt of forgiveness or for applying for the loan and ultimately not having merited it in the first place?
Well, let's look at when you applied for loan. Let's go back and document that state of mind. Let's look at everything that was going on at the point in time that you applied, and let's get that in the folder. Okay. Now let's walk out and see where we're at. If business is up, let's go talk to the lender. This is probably where the lender guidance is going to get very specific and say, hey, we really thought we were going to take a nosedive, but business actually has been good for us. We didn't take a nosedive. Let's go ahead and turn it into a loan. I think we're probably waiting 2 more weeks for the final guidance on that, and we're going to let that give you your answer.
If our funds will be depleted in 10 weeks, we can submit for forgiveness at that time, correct?
You can submit. You're going to be waiting on your bank to say, hey, yes, I'm ready to process or look at your forgiveness application, but you can submit prior to the 24 weeks because your funds are exhausted. Because if you went out past that 10 weeks, everything's going to be zero with PPP funds anyway.
Which payroll schedule do we answer if we normally pay biweekly but chose to pay weekly during the covered period?
Okay, for the covered period, you do the weekly amount. So your cap would be, $1,923 per week per any employee. But when you're looking back to do your FTE calculation, you're going to use what you were using in 2019 and see if anybody went over, that $100,000 annualized limit.
I received a PPP loan and applied for EIDL. Could I receive funds from both sources, or is it one or the other?
You can receive funds from both sources. You have to make sure that the SBA calculated it correctly. So you have to inform them that you have both. They know, okay? Ideally, what happens is they calculate your EIDL and they calculate your PPP and they say, all right, you got this much for payroll and the rest of your expenses we calculated in EIDL. Here you go. Here's your package. Because of the way things got kicked off, there were people that filed EIDLs before they got PPPs. Some of those initial EIDLs had a payroll factor in it. And with those, they're saying, hey, we can't pay you twice for the same payroll. So we're going to have to limit you somewhere.
What is a 941? I am a sole proprietor that is paid through 1099. I file taxes using 1040.
Okay, a 941 is a quarterly employment tax return. If you don't have any employees as a sole proprietor, you'll never see one. You'll be using your Schedule C for 2019 and focusing on line 31.
For a C Corp business owner, we use the $46,154 salary max amount and not the $20,833, correct?
No, I don't. I will have to get you guidance on that. I know it says owner right now, and I do not have guidance on percentages of owners. So I know it says owners right now. I would focus on the 20,833 until one of those FAQs comes out and gives us a little more guidance.
So members of an LLC who are paid as employees are not included.
Well, in the FTE calculations, that's true. Okay, you get to exclude those people because they're owners or they already made over $100,000, or if you annualized one of their pay periods, they were over $100,000. That's just for that FTE calculation, though.
Should you include overtime hours in the number of hours for reference periods and covered periods, or cap it at 40 hours?
It's capped at 40 hours. Okay. So if somebody's working 50 hours, you don't get another, quarter of a person because of it.
How do tips play into forgiveness application? Wages are obvious, but tips will weigh less because it was closed. Are tips to be included in wages?
If you have a business that has tips, a restaurant, bar, yes, they are to be included. They count as part of the compensation paid out. Wages and tips are all part of compensation.
Can the interest on your business loan line of credit be used?
It can, as long as the balance of the line of credit was in existence before February 15th, 2019.
Do we have to wait until after December 31st to submit the forgiveness form?
You don't, but there are some businesses that will, to see if their FTE count comes up. If they were running low during the year, but they're seasonal and they know they'll be hiring up for Christmas and things like that. There are some businesses who will strategically look at that and say, I'm going to have to wait before I file.
On the easy form, what is the max number of employees you can have under that form? Would 18 be too many?
That is a good question. I didn't read for a maximum on it. I don't know that it really has a max. I'll have to go back and check.
Do we need to let our lenders know if we are following the 8-week or changing to 24?
Right now, I don't think you need to let the lender know because the lender doesn't know. They're waiting for some guidance and for the American Banking Association to help them issue some guidance in coordination with the SBA. So, you give them their next week or two, they're going to start to have some guidance, and they'll start to contact you as a borrower. You'll get an email and say, hey, if it's time, let's sit down and talk about it.
Okay, it is now approaching 3 o'clock. So the last question is, can we still include health insurance on employees, but not the owner, as I understand?
Yes, you can. Especially if you're an S corporation, you would include health insurance on the employees. The owner would be excluded. And in the worksheets and tables that are included, there are columns for health insurance and for retirement costs, the employer match to the 401k.
So, Bryon, that was an awesome seminar here. You really, really dug deep. You were able to really lower a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. Explaining it the way you did and the strategy of how to go about it, I think is really what you're helping people understand. So I can't thank you enough. It's been a great event. Thank our sponsors. Of course, there's Louisiana Small Business Development Center, Small Business Administration, St. Tammany Corporation, Hammond Chamber of Commerce, Louisiana Economic Development, and Southeastern University. Bryon, I bid you a good day. Well, wait, before you leave, we've got some surveys that are going to go out. Please respond to those surveys so we can keep bringing you quality programming. And Karen, we sent out an email with the slides and associated documents. So thank you, Karen. You do a great job for us. So
thank you.
Everybody, a great day.
Happy Father's Day.
Yes.